I'm sure most of you remember this scene, the band playing their final song just before the ship makes its final descent. Well, this song is actually a famous hymn known as Nearer My God to Thee. For the longest time, it was believed that this was the very last song played before the ship went down, and it really wasn't just conjecture. A lot of survivors testified to this being the last song played before the ship went down. So, with so much testimony, why is this one of the Titanic facts that is called into question? Well, there are three reasons. 1. Many of the survivors who testified that it was the last song played got off the ship well before the ship would have made its final descent. How could they possibly know what was the last song played if they weren't there for it? A few claim that they heard the song from their lifeboats, but that is a sentiment that is very difficult to believe. 2. Nearer My God to Thee had 3 different versions of it. An American version referred to as Bethany, a Church of England version known as Horbury, and a British Methodist version known as Proprio Dio. Each version played to an entirely different melody. There was no one universally recognized version of this hymn. There is a chance that some of those who testified recognized every version, however, it is not very likely. One of the myths that made this idea so popular was that everyone still on board sang the hymn while the band played it. They did this as the ship literally sunk into the ocean. This was debunked after a while due to the fact that there were several versions. Just listen to the Bethany version in the 1953 film, followed by the Horbury version in the 1958 film. Pretty hard to believe that either the British or the American population on the ship could have so easily sung the version they were not familiar with. And of course the third reason, many of the survivors who were on the ship until the very end testified that they never once heard them play that song. One of the survivors, the highly respected Colonel Archibald Gracie, had this to say on the matter. I did not recognize any of the tunes, but I know they were cheerful and were not hymns. If, as has been reported, Nearer My God to Thee was one of the selections, I assuredly would have noticed it and regarded it as a tactless warning of immediate death to us all. Colonel Archibald Gracie was on board the ship when she foundered. He stayed on it until the very end and very passionately argues against them playing that song. Wireless Marconi operator Harold Bride, who was also on the ship when it went down, testified that the last song played was a popular waltz song called Song d'Automne. However, nobody else testified to this fact, and he did only say it the one time. The first survivor who testified that Nearer My God to Thee was the last song played was Canadian-born Vera Dick. However, she made it off in a lifeboat over an hour before the ship sunk. She claims she was able to make the song out from her lifeboat. However, how likely is it that she heard the music through all of the commotion on the ship? Wallace Hartley, the band's lead violinist, loved that song and had even claimed that he wanted it played at his funeral. However, being a British Methodist, he would have most likely played the Proprio Dio version, or even the Horbury version if that is the one his British bandmates preferred. However, Miss Vera Dick was from Canada and most likely would have only recognized the Bethany version. Something that could have possibly put this in her head was the tragedy of the SS Valencia, which was a steamship that sunk off the coast of Canada just 6 years prior. The ship sunk with 136 people on it, while everyone on board sung the Bethany version of Nearer My God to Thee as the ship sunk. What actually happened was that Vera Dick and a few others made this claim that this was the final song, and reporters just ran with it. Many of the reporters interviewed other survivors and put that idea in their head. In such case, you have a snowball effect, where the myth just keeps growing and growing until it has become accepted as fact. Once it gets reported on, it is very hard to undo. The print media at the time just used the idea of a final hymn to create a very godly and heroic image of the sinking. They knew doing this was just one of the more ways that they could manufacture the most engaging story possible. Filmmakers love using Nearer My God to Thee because it adds even more drama to the situation. Let's go back to James Cameron's version. I mean, this was one of the most dramatic scenes in the entire film, and I'm not sure it could have been accomplished without this music being played over it. But it's important to remember that this is film, not real life. In this real life situation, is it possible that passengers actually wanted to hear this? Archibald Gracie has a good point of it just highlighting everybody's imminent doom. I think at the end of the day, people just want it to be true. They like imagining that everyone on board sang this song and accepted their fate because it's hard for people to really think about the anxiety and horror that those on board must have felt during the sinking. We like to imagine that we would have acted bravely and heroically, but are very grateful we won't ever actually be put in that situation. As myths go, it's a relatively harmless one, all things considered. It's not about any person's final moments or anything like that. However, people accepting things as fact without enough evidence is exactly what created so many myths regarding the sinking in the first place.